screen and I'll guide us with a little bit of a slideshow here. So if you guys can see a really beautiful picture of a place that's called the Feathered Pipe Ranch, thumbs up. Thank you for that thumbs up. I like to start my presentations with this slide because this is the ground from which Veterans Yoga Project sprouted. The Feathered Pipe Foundation was our first fiscal sponsor before we were our own nonprofit, our own 501c3. And this is a place where we've done some amazing healing work with veterans and training work, teaching veterans to become yoga teachers. And so I just have that up there as my welcome slide. So I invite you guys to check out featheredpipe.com when you get the chance. So Veterans Yoga Project, this is us. Our mission is to support recovery and resilience. So we're talking about recovery from trauma and recovery from post-traumatic stress. But I will remind us that not every veteran is dealing with trauma and post-traumatic stress. And not everybody dealing with trauma and post-traumatic stress is a veteran or military member. This is our focus. Our focus is working with our military and veteran communities. But my hope is that you were able to take some of this information and these resources and apply them wherever it might be useful in your world. These are 19 amazing veterans and myself. And again, what I'm going to invite us to do is really to not move past post-traumatic stress, because today we really want to understand trauma. We want to sit with it. We want to be okay with just the awareness and the acceptance of that awareness. But really throughout the course of this month and throughout that post-traumatic stress journey, it really is about moving to post-traumatic growth. It's finding a life full of mission and purpose. And that's what we do here at Veterans Yoga Project. And here are 20 veterans that were scholarships through our first 200-hour training program, many of whom are now teaching yoga to other veterans, VAs, vet centers, and other places in the community. Some of them are volunteers and regional directors and board members now. So that's part of what we can use as part of that light that we keep our focus on, right? Because when we're in trauma and post-traumatic stress, it's dark and it's crappy, right? It's not a fun place to be. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to focus on post-traumatic stress disorder, help heal all wounds of war. So again, there's a lot of things that come about from serving in the military, and there's a lot of trauma that happens that has nothing to do with military or veteran service. But we do want you to care about post-traumatic stress because most people have had post-traumatic stress at some point in their life. And we will talk a little bit about that. So what are we going to do today? So today we're going to understand the diagnostic criteria for PTSD, right? So as a clinician, right, I need to be able to do an assessment with my patients and be able to see, okay, do you have this symptom? Do you have this symptom? And if they have the right symptoms and the right combinations, right, I'll give them a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So we want to understand that, right, because some of us might have been to see a psychologist or someone else who was attempting or did make a diagnosis for us. Some of us are in the position where we make that diagnosis for others. But we really want to understand the difference between PTSD and maybe some of the other subsyndromal PTSD and other consequences of trauma. We're going to talk about what trauma is, right? So before we get to post-traumatic stress and before we can appreciate and understand what post-traumatic stress is, let's start with the trauma. And we're going to understand what are the characteristics of trauma, because that's going to help give us a map so that we can really see that way towards post-traumatic growth. That. We're going to talk about the space model of trauma, the space model of PTSD, and the space model of mindful resilience. And this is the model that we use, again, to understand the survivor's lived experience. And by understanding that lived experience, we can understand, again, some of the resources and why those resources work. We'll talk about some of the other negative consequences associated with PTSD. And then again, we're going to just touch today on how yoga and meditation help and how these practices facilitate recovery and resilience. And then again, in a few weeks, during the 4th webinar of this month, we'll really be focusing a little bit more on that and sharing specific practices. I will let you know that after each of these 4 webinars this month, there is a yoga class that's being led, and we'll give you the link and the information to register for those free classes so that we can start to embody some of the work that we're talking about. So defining PTSD, what is PTSD, right? It's an anxiety disorder that happens after a traumatic event. Now, many of us, when we think about a traumatic event, when we think about military or veteran trauma, we think about combat, right? We think about, bullets and bombs and improvised explosive devices. And it's true that many of the veterans that we work with are dealing with combat-related stress and combat trauma. But you can see that this is just one of a list, and this is just a partial list of all the things that could result in post-traumatic stress. So it's an anxiety disorder where it happens following a traumatic event, right? An experience or witnessing of a traumatic event. And when that event was so overwhelming that we're not able to really fully integrate the experience into who we are, into our beliefs, into our outlook into the world, that's when we start to develop the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. I do point out that it is an anxiety disorder. So in the DSM, or the book that lists all the different disorders, right, we put PTSD in its own trauma class. But originally, and one really way to understand post-traumatic stress is that it is an anxiety disorder, meaning that the results of the disorder is an underlying deep intrinsic anxiety, right? A lack of ease or in the body. And what we know about anxiety is that it's psychological, right? But we know anxiety is also physiological, right? It's in the body and the mind. And that's really one of the reasons that yoga is such a phenomenal practice for an anxiety disorder, because yoga is a body and mind practice. So we want to understand that sometimes the symptoms of post-traumatic stress, they look like anxiety, right? And you can see that it seems like anxiety, and that often allows us to have a compassionate response. But not all symptoms of post-traumatic stress, not all consequences of post-traumatic stress look like anxiety, right? And sometimes, it could be impulsive aggression, it could be anger, it could be lots of different ways that these symptoms arise. And again, when somebody is displaying anger or impulsive aggression, our first response isn't compassion usually, it's defensiveness, right? And so what I'm going to invite us to do is to remember that the ability to be compassionate and to hold space for those who are recovering from trauma, regardless of what those symptoms are, is going to really be able to help facilitate recovery for those people that we might be holding space for. Here are my disclaimers, right? What we know is that PTSD, we know what it is, right? It's a disorder. We understand it. We understand the symptoms, and we know that there are effective treatments that work. There are evidence-based treatments, and I work with veterans all the time. I've worked with veterans who dealt with nightmares for 40 years, right? And they were able to engage in treatments and move out of post-traumatic stress and to start to live a life full of meaning and purpose and mission, right? Which is that embodiment of post-traumatic growth. So we know that there's a way through post-traumatic stress. And let me just say that it ain't easy. And it's not just like snapping your fingers, and it's not about just taking a pill. It's work, right? And there's good and enriching work to be done in that progression from post-traumatic stress. We know that it affects not just the person, right? It affects their whole community, it affects their families, and it affects all domains of functioning. And again, it's something that can be addressed even if it hasn't been addressed for years or even decades. What we know is that there's no one type of person that trauma affects, right? Trauma cuts across socioeconomic status, gender, age, everything, like sexual orientation, whatever it is. The traumatic events are part of life, right? And this is one of the things that yoga teaches us, right? Is that we can't control many of life's experiences, but we can control how we respond to them. We can develop the ability to be equanimous, to be okay with the insanity around us, right? With the tragedy, with the horror, with the grief, with all of that. But as you can see, everybody, not everybody, I'm sorry, a majority of people will have PTSD at some point in their lives, right? Where their symptoms would meet that criteria. And at any particular moment, up to 12 million adults have post-traumatic stress, right? So this, again, is something that doesn't just affect veterans or affect one type of person. So let's go back. So what is post-traumatic stress? What you can see here is I've put the D in parentheses, because as a clinician, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, right? But one could argue, and many have argued, that post-traumatic stress isn't a disorder. It's actually a totally normal response. It's what your body and mind are supposed to do to protect you. And so the response that we have after a traumatic event is normal, right? It just hasn't maybe fully resolved yet. It hasn't completed its cycle yet. And so we'll keep the D in parentheses. I think you can do that for a lot of disorders. But again, just to remind us that, and to take some of the stigma away of a post-traumatic stress diagnosis. And here in parentheses, I also put DSM-V, right? Which is the kind of Bible, the clinician's Bible that again lists all the different psychological disorders and what are the symptoms that you would have to meet criteria to be diagnosed with that particular disorder. So when it comes to post-traumatic stress, the very first criteria in order to have a PTSD diagnosis is there has to be a traumatic event, right? So we talked about, and we looked at that list of so many different things that can result in post-traumatic stress. But we also want to separate the traumatic event from the trauma, because many of us talk, right, about trauma as if it is a thing, right? It's sort of reified, right? Where I have trauma, I'm recovering from trauma. And when people talk about trauma, when you talk about trauma, what are you talking about? Are you talking about the traumatic event? No, right? When we talk about trauma, we talk about how it affected me, right? What was my response? What happened to me because of that event? And that's really what post-traumatic stress is. And we're going to talk more about that. But I want to pause you and let's rewind back. Before the trauma affected you, the traumatic event was there. What is it that makes an event traumatic? So I'm going to invite you guys, if you want, you can type your thoughts in the chat. You can even raise your electronic hand if you want to verbally just provide a guess out there. What is it that makes a traumatic event traumatic versus any other kind of event? Right? What is unique about a traumatic event that makes it stressful? Traumatic events are...
We have lots of stuff coming in the chat, feeling fight or flight, feeling overwhelmed. Each person's reaction is different. It's emotionally jarring, something out of your control, highly emotional charge, sudden and unexpected. There's a risk of death or serious injury, an inability to cope, something you're powerless in. It takes away your power.
Boom, you guys got it, right? So this is all it. So let's distill all of this down, right? And one of the first comments was risk of death or serious injury, right? So what we know is that all stressful and traumatic events, maybe, there we go, right, lack safety. If you think about any traumatic or stressful event that you've had in your life, was there a lack of safety? Right? If we use motor vehicle accidents, which are the most common cause of post-traumatic stress, right? If you were in a car accident, is there a lack of safety there? Yes, right? People get hurt and die in car accidents all the time. The second thing that I saw here was sudden and unexpected. Thank you, Beth, right? And yes, there's a lack of predictability, right? With a car accident, excuse me, I can't predict what my car is going to do. I can't predict what the other car is going to do. Maybe my trauma was a combat trauma, and right, I know that there are IEDs on the side of the road. I know there's going to be sniper fire, but I can't really predict when or where or how that's going to happen. So when we talked about predictability, it's not just knowing that, yeah, I live in California, there's going to be an earthquake someday. I can predict that, but being able to predict the exact context, the course of the event, and the unfolding of the event in real time. And so all stressful events, there's a lack of predictability there. And then someone also said that it says, where was the sudden and unexpected, can't get over, out of my control. Something that you thought, something that you were powerless in took away your power. And so that's the third one, and that's the lack of control. Right. So in a car accident, again, I can't control my car. I can't control the other car. Right. If I'm driving in country, right, I can't control the sniper fire or the IEDs, right? I can look out for them. If we think about, let's take COVID, for example. So here's a shared trauma. Here's a shared stressful experience that we've all endured together. And can we understand this through the lens of a lack of safety, predictability, and control? Was there a lack of safety? Yes. People have died, right? People are getting sick. Is there a lack of predictability? Sure. We don't know when it's going to end or who's going to get it or how you can get it or who has it at the moment. And it's really hard to control, right? So no wonder it's been such a stressful, traumatic experience for so many. As we start to exert control, right, as we start to be able to predict what how the virus behaves, as we start to use masks or vaccination, all of a sudden we feel a little bit less powerless, right? And so it's a little bit less stressful, a little bit less traumatic. But what we know is that all traumatic events lack space. All traumatic and stressful events lack a safe, predictable, and controllable environment, SPACE. That car accident, when you were going through it, there was a lack of safety, predictability, and control, right? When somebody gets assaulted, right, there's a lack of safety, there's a lack of predictability, there's a lack of control, right? When somebody is in a natural disaster, there's a lack of safety, there's a lack of predictability, lack of control. So we can understand trauma by these three things. We know all traumatic and stressful events lack safety, predictability, and control. But it's not just the circumstances of that external event, right? It's not just the cars that are unpredictable and uncontrollable. It's not just the external environment that's unsafe and unpredictable and uncontrollable. If you've ever been through a traumatic event, sometimes when you're going through a traumatic event, you become unsafe and unpredictable and uncontrollable. Your own mind becomes unsafe, predictable, and controllable. Your own behavior becomes unsafe and unpredictable and uncontrollable. So for example, I had a veteran tell me in not so many words that, hey, doc, I couldn't predict or control the fact that I projectile vomited the first time I had to pick up a body part. And that sure as hell didn't feel safe. I've had other vets or other people tell me that when it was going down, when the stuff happened, I froze. I didn't train to freeze. That's not how I trained. That's not how I predicted I would react at the time. I didn't predict I would react that way. I couldn't control it. I was just frozen, and it sure as hell didn't feel safe. Or sometimes, right, someone who reported being in a car accident, right, and the car was turning and turning, and it finally came to a stop, and their body just kept shaking, right? And they talked about how their body wouldn't stop shaking. They couldn't predict that that's how their body was going to react. They couldn't control it at the time, and it sure as heck didn't feel safe. So what we know is that at the time of a trauma, right, that there is a lack of space externally, right? The cars are unpredictable, uncontrollable, unsafe, but my own thoughts, my own body, and my own behaviors can also lack that safety, predictability, and control, right? When the shit went down, right, I did not behave the way I predicted I would. I did not behave the way I would want to, right? My body didn't do what I thought it would, what I was trained to do. And so we can understand traumatic events as having a lack of space externally, but also there's a lack of space internally. My own thoughts, my own physical body, my own behaviors are not predictable, controllable, or safe. So that's the traumatic event, right? So we can understand trauma as lacking this space. So what happens after the trauma? Well, for some people, they develop post-traumatic stress, which means they develop certain symptoms. One type of symptom that some people develop after a traumatic event are intrusive symptoms, meaning that I have intruding thoughts, intruding memories, intruding feelings, intruding physiological reactions that are unpredictable, and they're uncontrollable, and they don't feel so safe. Right? So I might be just driving my kid to school, and then all of a sudden I have this intrusive memory of the car accident, right? And I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know when all of a sudden that thought or that memory is going to pop into my head. And I can't control when it happens. And very often, right, my heart starts pounding, I start sweating, my body starts reacting in an intrusive way, in a way that's unpredictable. I don't know what happened, doc. I was driving here and all of a sudden, I started sweating like a pig and my heart was pounding out of my chest. It was unpredictable and I couldn't control it. And it doesn't feel safe. Sometimes these intrusive thoughts or memories or images happen while you're asleep. And so we know nightmares are a very significant part of the post-traumatic stress picture. I can't predict when I'm going to have the nightmares or what that nightmare is going to be about. I can't control it, and it doesn't feel safe. So we can understand the intrusive symptoms, right? The intrusive thoughts and memories as being a lack of safety, predictability, and control in the mind, for example. Right? My mind is not predictable. I can't predict when it's going to all of a sudden hijack me. I can't control when it's just going to hijack my thoughts, feelings, behaviors, my moment to moment existence. So that's the first category of symptoms, right? The first symptom cluster are these intrusive symptoms. And so if you have at least one of these, right, you meet the criteria for criteria B. In addition to these intrusive symptoms of post-traumatic stress, well, I mean, if it were you, would you want to not have those experiences? I know I would, right? If I had all these intrusive thoughts and images and memories, I would want to try not to have those intrusive thoughts and memories. So I'm going to do my best to try to avoid thinking about it, avoid feeling the feelings, avoid the people, places, and things that might trigger me off, right? So avoidance, again, happens both with the external environment and the internal environment. So, right, if we're living in a world that externally seems unsafe and unpredictable and uncontrollable, I'm hardwired to seek pain and avoid pleasure. I mean, seek pleasure and avoid pain, right? So I'm hardwired. So I'm going to avoid anything in the external environment that might trigger me, that might remind me, that might make me a little uncomfortable. But I'm also going to avoid the internal world. I'm going to avoid thoughts and I'm going to try not to think about things. I'm going to do whatever I can and play all sorts of mental gymnastics, not to think this, not to feel this. And so we see emotional numbing, right, as being one of the core symptoms of post-traumatic stress, right? It's an avoidance of all of those very significant negative thoughts and emotions, right? Which is the next criteria, right? The third of the 4 symptom clusters. Negative changes in thought and mood, right? This is the anger and the anxiety and the fear and the guilt and the shame and the grief. But it's also about the way we now interpret the world, right? So now we see the world as being negative, right? We see ourselves in a negative light. We see others in a negative light. We see the world in a negative light. Very often, one of the symptoms that's most challenging is it's not all these negative emotions, but it's the lack of positive emotions, right? It's the inability to feel happiness and joy, right? I love my kids. I know I love them. I just don't feel like it, right? I used to enjoy playing catch with my kids, but now, I don't. This feeling detached and estranged from others, right? We know that disconnection, right, is one of the more significant challenges of any mental health disorder, right? Is social support is so important. And with post-traumatic stress comes this, nobody understands me, right? Nobody's really going to understand what I've been through. And then the 4th symptom cluster are these changes in physiology. So what happens is that individuals with post-traumatic stress cycle between being hyper aroused. So physiologically, they have a lot of physiological energy and they maybe have too much physiological energy to really live in line with their values and goals. And they cycle between being hypo aroused and not having enough energy, right? But we need physiology, like physiologically, right? Physiology determines phenomenology. So physiologically, we're too hyper aroused or too hypo aroused to look you in the eye, to connect with you, right? To engage in goal-directed behavior. Well, then I'm not going to engage in that goal-directed behavior, and I'm more likely to fall into the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. these alterations in physiological arousal, right, lead to the symptoms that you can see, right? Hypervigilance, paying attention, right? Keeping my back to the door and my eyes on the exits. I don't go outside in crowds. I don't go to the supermarket except in the middle of the night when no one else is there. Problems concentrating, right? If I have all these intrusive thoughts and memories and images, it's hard to focus on getting this report written. Right? If my arousal level is not where it needs to be, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping. Right? I'm going to wake up in the middle of the night and be on edge and hypervigilant, and I'm going to have a hard time falling back to sleep. So those are your 4 symptom clusters, right? And I'm just going to go back here. So if you have one of these intrusive symptoms, at least one, and you have at least one of these avoidance symptoms, right? And again, sometimes a lot of this is happening under conscious awareness. So sometimes you really need to do the work and like think about, okay, am I really engaging in avoidance? And then if we have 3 or more of these negative changes in thought and mood, and we have 3 or more of these symptoms associated with alterations in arousal, well, then you've hit the criteria, right? You have now met criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. What we know is that about 1/3 of people with post-traumatic stress disorder have a dissociative subtype, meaning that dissociation, so dissociation is really just kind of leaving the moment. It's not being fully grounded and present. So sometimes dissociation happens when we just daydream, right? I could be sitting here talking to you and I just get distracted and I think about something and then I bring my attention right back, right? Or maybe dissociation can be a little bit more intense where I sort of get distracted and I can sort of see the image and I can start to feel the feelings. And maybe it's a while before I come back and realize, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be here, right? And then sometimes people have dissociative symptoms where they totally are not here, right? They're standing in front of you, right? They're looking at you, but what they see in their mind's eye isn't what you think they see, right? It's sometimes a combining of sort of like a dream-like memory state and what's really happening, right? And so this results in people feeling like this isn't real, this isn't happening to me, I'm not, this isn't, I feel like I'm not really here in this person. And so we have a lot of folks who have dissociative symptoms. And then, as I said earlier, for many people, the symptoms don't actually come up right away. So the traumatic event may have happened, but good coping skills or whatever reason, right, you might not have symptoms till days later, weeks later, months, years, even decades later. Where I've worked with someone who had things go on in Vietnam, for example, but they were able to manage it for many years. And then all of a sudden some new things happen in their life. And now that old trauma is stirring old stuff up, right? It is causing the sleeplessness, is causing that hypervigilance, is causing that agitation. So let me ask you guys, are there any math whizzes here? Any like mathematics professors online? Because what I was going to do is I was going to give you a little math problem, right? So if you need one of these, and you need just one of these, and you need 3 of these, and you need 3 of these, and then you may or may not have dissociative, it may or may not be with delayed expression. How many different combinations of symptoms do you think there are that can lead to a PTSD diagnosis? If you want to put something in the chat just to take a guess, or maybe you already know it, right? But you could have a lot of different combinations then of ways that those symptoms can fit together to get that PTSD diagnosis. All right, Michelle says maybe there's 8 or 9 different combinations. I was never a math whiz myself, but if you actually do the math, 30 plus, nope, even higher. 636,000. Whatever you think you know about post-traumatic stress, throw it out the door. You don't know what anybody's experience is. You have no idea what somebody's been through. You have no idea what they're going through on a daily basis. even if you know they have, quote, and have a diagnosis of PTSD, right? There's a lot of different ways that somebody can manifest. And PTSD is only one of the potential consequences of a traumatic event. Very often in children, traumatic events and post-traumatic stress gets diagnosed as something else, as ADD, as bipolar disorder, as all sorts of things. And so we know that there's a lot of ways that trauma can manifest. And there's a lot of different ways to experience that post-traumatic stress experience. But what we can do is we can bring it back, right? We don't have to try to remember 636,000 combinations, right? One way that we can understand post-traumatic stress, right, is we remember how there's a lack of space during the trauma, right? Both internally and externally. Well, one way to understand post-traumatic stress is that there's a continuation of this lack of space. So let's look at the lack of external space, right? Where the external world seems unsafe and unpredictable and controllable. So what do? I keep my back to the wall. I don't go out. If I do go out, I sit with my back to the wall and my eyes on the exits. Right? I don't know what people are going to say or do, so I'm going to avoid them. I'm going to engage in avoidance of external things. But what's more debilitating about post-traumatic stress isn't the lack of external space that I still feel, right? It's not the fact that I'm walking around in a world that feels unsafe and unpredictable and controllable. What's really debilitating about the post-traumatic stress experience is the lack of internal safety, predictability, and control. I'm not predictable or controllable. My thoughts are not predictable and controllable. My feelings are not predictable and controllable. My behaviors aren't predictable and controllable. My verbalizations aren't predictable and controllable. That's what's debilitating about post-traumatic stress. Yeah, the world and the external world can feel unsafe and unpredictable and controllable, but my own mind, right? I have these intrusive thoughts and images and I don't know when they're going to happen and I can't control them. I have my heart beats and I start sweating, right? And I start getting all stressed out and I can't predict when it's going to happen and I can't control it when it happens. This is how people experience post-traumatic stress, right? They don't experience these 4 symptom clusters, right? As a clinician, that's how I can understand it. But when somebody's experiencing their day-to-day experience, what's happening, right? The external world lacks safety, predictability, and control, and my internal world lacks safety, predictability, and control. And so one of the things that you could do, right, homework assignment if you wanted to, right, is to maybe go back and think about some of the stressful things in your life or traumatic events in your life and try to understand them through a space lens. In what way was that experience, the traumatic event, unsafe, predictable, controllable externally? In what way was that traumatic event unsafe and unpredictable and controllable internally? Right? What was happening with you in the moment that happened? And now since the event, right? How has your external world felt unsafe? How has your external world felt unpredictable? How has your external world felt uncontrollable? And then maybe more importantly, how is your internal world? How is your thoughts, your feelings, your body? How have they expressed that lack of safety, predictability, and control? So you have your 4 symptom clusters. What we know is that each of these symptom clusters kind of feeds off the other one. So the more intrusive symptoms I have, the more likely I'm going to engage in avoidance, right? So I'm going to go ahead and spend more time isolated in my basement. But then the more time I spend in avoidance, the more intrusive thoughts and images and feelings I have, right? Because I'm just alone with my own thoughts and feelings and images, right? And so now I have all these negative thoughts and mood. And the more I have that, the more my physiology gets out of whack, right? And so what happens is you start to see almost a downward spiral where each of these symptoms, unfortunately, feeds into and exacerbates the next category of symptoms. Again, if we look at it from the lens of lack of safety, predictability, and control, right? These are all symptoms, right, that can be seen through that lens. So what does that mean for us, right? So what we know is that trauma, by definition, is an event that lacks safety, predictability, and control internally and externally. That post-traumatic stress is an experience that is marked by a lack of safety, predictability, and control internally and externally. So then what? I'm going to invite you all to just take a nice, long, slow, deep inhale with me. And maybe exhale. Let's go ahead and take another big inhale together. And I will be able to predict with 100% accuracy what you're going to do next. All right, you exhale. Let's do it again. Let's take a deep inhale. And this time, hold your breath for 2 beats. And then let your breath out slowly. All right, let's do that again. Nice, big, full inhale. Control your breath, hold it for 2 beats, and then control your exhale so that your exhale is longer and slower than your inhale. Let's do a couple more of those. Big, full, deep inhale. Bring that breath big into the belly. Hold it for just a beat or 2, and then let it out real slow. So maybe your exhale is even longer or even twice as long as your inhale. And you can keep doing that. So what just happened there? Your breath just became a little bit more predictable, right? You started to control the breath, right? The breath became a little more controllable. And if you do this for 5 or 6 breaths, where you take a deep inhale, you hold for just a beat, and then you let your exhale be longer and slower than your inhale, I will guarantee that you're going to start to feel a sense of safety in the body. Because what happens is when you make your exhale longer than your inhale, right, it switches your autonomic nervous system to be parasympathetically dominated. That relaxation response starts to kick in. Simply by taking that big, full, deep inhale and then lengthening, making your exhale longer and slower. So your breath, right, the practice of breath work helps create a little bit of predictability, a little bit of control, a little bit of a felt sense of safety. I'm going to invite you all now to bring your attention right to the tips of your nostrils, right where the breath exits and enters the body, and to see if you can notice what that feels like there as you breathe. Just keep all of your attention just on the sensations of your breath right there at the tips of your nostrils. What probably happened as you tried to do that is you got distracted, right? You're thinking about other things, you're getting distracted by other things on the screen, you're wondering what's next, right? And what happens in what meditation is you just bring your attention back to the felt sensation of the breath. So that's what meditation is. Meditation is not making your mind go blank. Meditation isn't about finding some, happy place in your mind. Meditation is training. It's training your mind. It's training your attentional resources so that you can put your attention where you want to put your attention for as long as you want to put your attention there. And so the practice of meditation is noticing the sensation of the breath, right? You're focusing on the breath, and all of a sudden you're thinking about ice cream. All right, bring your attention back to the breath. Focusing on the breath, and all of a sudden I'm thinking about the guinea pig. Right, and focusing on the breath, and it's just that practice of returning the mind. And so what's happening as we do meditation? Each time I'm focusing on the breath and I notice that my mind has been distracted, that's awareness. Over time, guess what happens is if I meditate, I start to be able to predict where my mind goes. My mind becomes more predictable. I'm always thinking about that damn guinea pig in the morning, right? Knowing that my kid hasn't cleaned up the poop yet, right? Or I always think about cookies after lunch because I like cookies, right? Over time, what meditation does is it helps you know yourself better, right? Because you start to be able to predict and know where your mind goes when you try to quiet it down. Every time I sit to meditate, I can't help but be distracted by the pain in my lower back, right? Whatever it is, your mind becomes more predictable. And then guess what happens, right? If anybody here has ever engaged in a regular meditation practice, what you'll notice is that when you try to focus on your breath, right, it only takes 1 or 2 breath cycles before you get distracted, right? And then you got to bring your attention back. But with a little bit of practice, what happens is I can start to focus on my breath, and I focus on my breath for 3 breath cycles before I get distracted. And then after a while, with more practice, I can keep my attention focused for 4 breath cycles before I get distracted. And then with more practice, I can control my attentional resources more easily. I can bring my attention where I want to bring it for as long as I want to bring it there. I can stay focused on my breath for maybe 30 seconds before now I'm being distracted. And so what does meditation do? It allows your mind to become a little more predictable. Your mind becomes a little more controllable. And now you have an asset. So instead of an untrained puppy that's crapping all over the house and pulling you all around the neighborhood in this direction and next, now you have a well-trained dog, a puppy, an asset that will heal, that will stay by your side, right? That will engage in all the amazing things that our minds can do. So we know that breath work and meditation, right? They're creating predictability, they're creating control, and they're creating a felt sense of safety. What else do we do in yoga? We breathe, we focus our mind. We also move our body, right? We bring our attention and we notice what our body feels like. So what happens when I bring my attention into my body, right? I could be doing a warrior pose, right? My arms are out here and I can bring my attention to my backhand, see if it is where I think it is, right? Over time, as I move my body in all these different ways, I start to be able to predict how my body feels, right? I can notice, right? Maybe that nagging pain in my lower back, but then I also start to notice places in my body where I don't feel pain, right? Where I start to feel strengthening, right? Where I can feel empowerment in my body. Over time, the body, which also often becomes ignored. So when we talk about avoidance, avoidance is one of the 4 symptom clusters. One of the things that we avoid with post-traumatic stress is awareness of our own body. Our body was involved in that traumatic event, no matter what, right? Our body was there. And very often our body betrayed us, or we feel like the body betrayed us, or the body didn't do what we predicted it would do, or we trained it to do, or we wanted it to do. And so that results in a lot of avoidance and not feeling our bodies. And so the practice of yoga involves bringing our attention into the body and noticing what the body feels like. And over time, guess what? Your body gets a little more predictable. Right? You can start to notice what your body feels like, and you can start to predict how eating this or eating that will affect your body, or how engaging in this exercise or this will affect your body. And then over time, what happens is we're able to control not only the way we move our body, but we can control the sensory experience, right? We can start to control the pain experience. We can use our meditative and breathing techniques, right, to, decrease chronic pain, for example. So the body over time becomes more predictable. I can sense what my body feels like in different ways and in different positions. I can also control my body, right? I can control the way I move my body, right? If you've never done a handstand before, right, you're probably not going to just jump up today and jump into a handstand. But if you practice for a week or 2 and do some preparations and some arm balances, right, eventually your body becomes more controllable and you can do a handstand. Over time, this is what the practice of asana, or the movement and sensory practice of meditation, is. Your physical body becomes more predictable. Your physical body becomes more controllable, and your physical body becomes more safe. And that happens both on the sensory side, right? Half of your neurons are sensory neurons, half of your nervous system is sensory based. We're noticing how we feel, right? And we're using that information. And the other half of our nervous system are motor neurons. So the way we move, right? We start to engage in balancing practices, and guess what? We're less likely to fall and break a hip as we age, right? So the physical practices of meditation and physical asana and bringing attention to the body help create safety, predictability, and control in the body. And so this is essentially how yoga works to help with post-traumatic stress, because individuals who are dealing with a mind and a body and behaviors and feelings that are unsafe and unpredictable and controllable can now start to learn techniques to bring a little bit of safety, predictability, and control into the mind, the body, and the spirit, the breath. However, there's a caveat here, right? It's not that simple, is it? One of the things that makes using these tools so difficult or so tough is the fact that we're already physiologically hyper aroused, right? We're already in a place where we might be in a defensive posture where we might not be able to focus and concentrate. How can I concentrate on this breath work when I'm, have all these intrusive thoughts and images? So one of the things that we do is we think about creating a safe, predictable, and controllable external environment, because we just learned, right, that yoga creates a safe, predictable, and controllable internal environment, right? It creates that space within the mind and the spirit and the body. When we are not safe, our physiology moves to that sympathetic nervous system fight or flight response. When we feel safe, right, we have that opposite rest and relaxation response. That's where healing happens, right? What we know is that the body heals itself, right? The body heals itself, right? Anybody can argue with that? No, right? I broke my ankle years ago. I put my foot in a boot over a few weeks. My bone healed with the bone healed itself. My body healed itself. I scratched myself shaving, my body heals itself. My daughter burned the heck out of her finger. Oh my God, it was all blistered up and gross and disgusting, right? And now it's almost all healed over, right? The body heals itself when we create the conditions for healing to occur, right? My daughter's finger would not heal, right, if we didn't keep it clean and if she wasn't eating good food and being, well hydrated and all that, right? Like you have to have the conditions, right? You have to have the Band-Aid on it, right? All of that create the conditions for that healing to occur. If I didn't put the boot on my ankle would have healed all wonky. And what I'm going to insist is that the mind and the spirit are just like the body. They are pre-programmed for spontaneous healing. The mind and the spirit are just like the body. We are programmed for spontaneous healing. The mind and the body and the spirit heal themselves when we create the conditions for healing to occur. Right, I could ask you guys, how many of you have ever had a broken heart? Right, not too many people on camera, but right, most of us have had a broken heart, right? And guess what happened? It healed. If it hasn't healed yet, trust me, in time it will, right? But right, it still scar maybe, and maybe there's still a little bit of scar tissue there, right? With grief, has anybody ever lost somebody that they cared about, right? Yes, right, that grief, right, it's still there, but the immediacy of that trauma goes away, right? You do heal, even though there's scar and there might be a little scar tissue and a little bit of grief there, right? The immediacy, the trauma of it, we do, right? Our minds and spirits heal when we create the conditions for healing to occur. And I'm going to say that each one of us has the ability to create the conditions for healing to occur for anyone that we're working with or anyone that's around us, anyone in our home. And the way that we do that, the way we create the conditions for harmony, the way we create the conditions for excellent interpersonal communication, the way we create the conditions for relationships is to create a safe, predictable, and controllable environment. Right? If my wife's running late, right? She's coming home from work and she comes home at 6 o'clock and it's 6:15 and I haven't heard from her, guess what happens? Right, my mind's going, right? Oh shit, there's an ambulance and I hope she's okay. What if she's in a car accident, blah, 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 right? But if she called me ahead of time and gave me predictability and said, oh, hey, Dan, I'm gonna be home a little bit late tonight because I gotta stop at the supermarket or whatever. Right now, right, all that mental energy that I spent worrying and feeling like, oh no, something, now I'm at ease, right? Because my wife gave me a little predictability. And what I would insist is that we all have the ability to create safety, predictability, and control for those of us around us, for those who are around us. You don't have to be a clinician or a yoga teacher or anything, right? When we are creating safety, predictability, and control for those around us, we're creating a more harmonious world. And it really comes down simply to communication. If I let you know what I'm doing and give you some sense of control, right, you're going to feel more at ease. One of the examples I use is of a mom of a vet who, you know, was in combat, came back, you know, living with his mom, and he was dealing with post-traumatic stress, and they might be sitting on the couch together watching Netflix or whatever. And she would get up to go, you know, get some water from the kitchen. And when she would get up, every time she'd get up, he'd be like, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" Right? Because he just sort of got startled in the moment. She didn't really understand this at first. She's like, "Why are you sweating me? I'm just getting up to get some water. Why are you harassing me? Leave me, like, stop, you know, I can do what I want. This is my damn house. I'll get up when I want," right? All this stuff happened when really what was happening was he just got startled. So then she learned to say, hey, John, I'm going to go to the kitchen and get some water. Can I get you anything? Right now, right, it's not unpredictable, right? She just provided a little predictability of what she was going to do. If I tell my daughter, hey, it's time to get off the iPad, right, bad news. But if I tell her, hey, 5 more minutes on the iPad, okay, 2 more minutes on the iPad, then guess what? Sometimes she actually comes to me and hands the iPad. I don't even have to say time's up, right? Because we gave a little bit of predictability. So we can do that for any of those in our lives. The more we can communicate with those around us, the more we can provide that sense of safety, predictability, and control, the more those around us will have their physiology in that sweet spot that allows them to engage in goal-directed behavior, that allows them to live in alignment with their own values and goals. And so that's essentially what we do at Veterans Yoga Project. That is the mindful resilience approach to trauma and post-traumatic stress and to post-traumatic growth. We acknowledge that trauma is characterized by a lack of safety, predictability, and control internally and externally. We acknowledge that post-traumatic stress is marked by a lack of safety, predictability, and control, both internally and externally. And we acknowledge that the tools of yoga can create that internal safety, predictability, and control, especially when we create the external environment, and we create an external environment that is marked by a sense of safety, predictability, and control. Because if I'm in a safe environment, now I can hear and I can listen to the breathing practice. Now I can fully focus on the meditation practice, and I can start to create that space internally. There are many, many things that happen because of trauma that have nothing to do with the 4 symptom clusters, right? People with post-traumatic stress are more likely to deal with chronic brain injury, traumatic brain injury, and chronic pain, and polysubstance abuse, and depression. And people with post-traumatic stress have more physiological diseases, heart disease, and that kind of thing. We know that when you have all of that stuff, right, it's going to be hard to keep your job. You're going to have more legal issues, excuse me, right? You're going to have more difficulty maintaining your job and paying your mortgage. And unfortunately, what we know is that there are way too many suicides, and especially in the last year or so, overdoses, not just veterans, but all people who are dealing with post-traumatic stress, right, that wind up getting themselves in trouble and going down that spiral. And of course, in the veteran world, right, 22 suicides a day is the magic number. Last I heard, maybe it's 18 every freaking day, and that's too much. And so what we're really here to do this month, right, in PTSD awareness, it's not just awareness of PTSD, but awareness of the fact that you can recover from post-traumatic stress, right? That it affects not just the veteran or the person, but it affects everyone that person is in contact with, right? Their kids, their spouses, their sisters and brothers, their parents, and that we all have a role to play in creating that safe, predictable, controllable environment, to sharing resources that create a safe, predictable, controllable internal environment. And this is what we do at yoga, right? Yoga isn't about, right? I mean, there's lots of ways that people understand yoga. But for us, This is it. It's the 5 tools. When we breathe, when we focus our minds, when we move our bodies mindfully, when we take the time to rest and do that internal sensory awareness, and when we have time for gratitude, these are the 5 tools that we at Veterans Yoga Project have found to be so helpful. We have heard so many yoga saved my life stories, and it's because it's the practice, right? It has nothing to do with the teachers or even Veterans Yoga Project as an organization. It's about doing the practice. And when individuals are supported and they feel that they have love and support, they can start to use these tools and start to do the work and move from post-traumatic stress to post-traumatic growth. So please know that there are lots of resources and lots of effective treatments available. And if there's anything that we can do at Veterans Yoga Project to help connect you with those resources, please let us know. We documented 17,000 visits last year where our veterans and their family members were coming to our classes at VAs, vet centers in the community. And we're only able to do that because of you, right? And so this is the model, the 5 tools. We focus on the breath and the body. And we also, right, if we had time, we would show you the map, right? So we want you to navigate space and create space. We give you a map to do that. We have a space checklist to do that. But ultimately, these are the things that result in strength and stability and flexibility. And that is recovery. That is the road to post-traumatic growth. So I want to thank you all so much for being here. I am going to skip that slide because that didn't come out the way I wanted it to. I'm going to briefly switch here, right? Hopefully you can see that screen. This was the first in 4 webinars, followed by 4 yoga classes. And so today is this one, even though it says June 4th, that's not true. June 4th, you can come back and have a class with Brian. Again, week 2, Mike Ergo and Jessica Bugby will be here to talk very specifically about military and veteran trauma and stress. Week 3, super excited. Go read her book and go work through her book. Dr. Gail Parker, Yoga for Healing the Wounds of Ethnic and Race-Based Traumatic Stress. And then week 4, we're going to come back with Jessica and Mike, and we're going to be talking about yoga's role in post-traumatic growth. So that takes me just over our 1 hour. I am more than happy to take questions, to engage in conversation. Thank you all so much for being here. Hopefully this was a little bit helpful and one, maybe a way for us to understand trauma and post-traumatic stress. And please do, if you found anything useful here, share it with others. And again, importantly, this is one of our important fundraising campaigns of the year. It takes a lot of resources just to bring yoga to vets. So if you are so inclined and have the ability, please do make a donation, become part of our monthly giving program, our Buddy Aid program, and or if there are other organizations or foundations out there that you think we can partner with to help achieve the mission, please do let us know.
Hey, Dan.
Hey, Alex.
Hey, we did have a couple questions that came earlier and I saved them on the side here. So one was not really a question, but a thought about like, is this related to living through a recurring threat of a similar or same event that keeps happening over and over and over? Like, what are your thoughts about that in relation to what we've gone over today? And also, is this tied into what I think she was lovingly referring to as an increase in obvious symptoms from the general public during COVID?
Yes and yes. Yeah, I mean, you can look at what's happening in COVID and you can look at these symptoms, and this is what's being expressed. We talk about post-traumatic stress and we talk about this traumatic event. Very rarely is there one traumatic event, right? We try to understand trauma and post-traumatic stress from this lens, but in reality, here, let me just stop the share there. In reality, many people are living in stress, right? We're going to talk with Dr. Gail Parker about racial stress and racism, right? And people that, spend their entire lives with some level of threat there. There is a perpetual felt sense of a lack of safety. There's a perpetual lack of predictability. There's a perpetual lack of control. And so we like to understand trauma and post-traumatic stress as like a reaction to an event, but it's so much more complicated than that, right? Not only are there 636,000 combinations of the symptoms, but there are various levels of those symptoms, and then there's the ongoing stress, right? So it's much more difficult to recover from post-traumatic stress. It's much more difficult to move in through post-traumatic growth if that threat is still there, if that lack of predictability is still there, if that lack of safety and predictability and control is still there. So you can look at what's happening in our greater culture, right? Sure, is there reactivity? I think so. Right? Are people hyper-reactive and hypersensitive and hypervigilant? It seems so. Intrusive thoughts and memories or about COVID, about all the other things happening in this world, right? And it's not just COVID, it's right, all the news stuff that we see, right? And what just happened with those kids in Texas, right? If you've watched that news and you've ever, let's say you've been following that story, and at some point during your day, you think about it, right? That's an intrusive thought or image or memory of that event. And so when people are constantly exposing themselves to all the stimuli that remind them of this tragedy and this grief and this sadness and et cetera, we're going to display those symptoms as a culture. And so I think you can absolutely see that, which to bring it back around, right? And we want to be aware of the trauma that's there. We want to accept that trauma, right? Because very often when we have an awareness of something, we avoid it, right? And so I don't want to think about that. I don't want to acknowledge it. I don't want to deal with it. But in order to get to action, you have to have acceptance, right? So in our space model, we're going to give you a map. We also use AAA because I've always had crappy cars, and AAA has always been a godsend for me. But for us, AAA is about awareness, acceptance, and action, right? So first, awareness is the first step. Acceptance being that second step, right? And the ability to accept that awareness. And then finally, that's when we're able to take action.
Thank you, Dan. We have another question that came through anonymously. They ask if I would bring up if you feel that people can get secondary PTSD from listening to veterans' PTSD stressors. I'm a veteran guys, of course. They said, I'm a veteran service officer and I hear people's awful detailed stories almost every day. It feels similar to compassion fatigue. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, Alex, but you cut out on me for the first part of that. Could you repeat that for me?
Oh, please? I thought it was my dogs. Okay, so the full question was, would you please ask Dr. Libby if he feels that people can get secondary PTSD from listening to veterans' PTSD stressors? I'm a veteran service officer and I hear people's awful detailed stories almost every day. It feels similar to compassion fatigue. So what are your thoughts on that?
Bingo. I mean, you just, right, as a veteran service officer, as a clinical psychologist, we are in a very sacred position, right, where we really do get to hear, and when you hear somebody's trauma story, you're imagining it in your mind, you're visualizing it, you're seeing it there, right? You're going to feel some of the same feelings. You are actually experiencing that vicariously. And so when you do repeatedly hear these trauma stories, when you repeatedly expose yourself to all the shit on the news, right, you're traumatizing yourself, right? And so there are ways, right, for us to manage that without taking it on, right? And so you're talking about secondary or vicarious trauma, right? A very real thing that happens. And if you're a veteran service officer, if this is happening to you on the regular, you really need to regularly practice the tools that you need to practice to avoid compassion fatigue, right? So I'll use this as a moment to plug our Mindful Resilience for Compassion Fatigue program, which is a 6 or 7 week online blended program. So there's some online learning modules, and then we come together in small groups and practice the tools. And the idea is to build a practice, a daily practice, so we can understand the difference between burnout and vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, and then actually take the necessary steps so that we can have an ongoing practice to prevent that from happening. Because it's very, it's tough, man. Trauma's, we talk about trauma and I can sit here and talk about it. But the felt experience of it is intense and it's heavy.
The person that asked that question said, "Thank you. I feel very validated."
Yeah, feel validated, and you probably still feel traumatized. So part of me is thinking, okay, you got to go take care of yourself and make sure you're taking care of yourself. But ultimately, it's more than that. I mean, self-care really is about paying attention, because you can listen to so many of those trauma stories and you can try to put it out, but eventually it's going to catch up to you, right? And eventually you're going to feel it when you're sitting at home at night and you're trying to have dinner with your family and you're thinking about your client and you're thinking about that trauma story. And that's not healthy for anybody. So go check out our Mindful Resilience for Compassion Fatigue program. So hearing no other questions, feel free to pop them into the chat if they come up. But maybe we can finish by just doing a little breathing together. Does that sound okay? So I'm going to invite us to find a supported seated position. You don't have to sit like a yogi or cross your legs in any certain way, right? You can just find a way that sits, that feels supported, maybe sitting up tall so that your spine is relatively straight, just with those nice neutral curves. Maybe your feet are flat on the floor. And I'll invite you to maybe just acknowledge your external environment so that you can start to bring your attention to your internal environment. You can bring your internal attention to your internal environment by softening your gaze. Eyes can be open or closed. And as you bring your attention inward, I'll invite you to start by noticing the physical sensations in your body. Maybe you notice where your back of your legs or your butt meets the chair. Maybe you notice the bottoms of your feet meeting the floor. Maybe your hands are on your lap. But for a few breath cycles, let the physical sensations of that sense of connection and touch occupy the main stage of your awareness. Allow your awareness to open up and really take in the entire sense of your entire body. Not trying to feel anything in particular, but just noticing what you notice right here and right now. Including noticing the sensations of your breath. At first, without trying to change the breath, first just notice what you notice as you watch the inhale and exhale. Just allowing awareness of the breath first and acceptance of that awareness. So not trying to change it. It might feel rapid or slow or deep or shallow. Just let it be what it is. Let yourself be okay right now. Let everything just be okay right now. And then if you'd like, continuing to let it all be okay, go ahead and let your exhale be a little longer and deeper and fuller. Let your belly button come in towards the front of your spine as you exhale a little bit more breath from your body. And then allow that sense of a three-dimensional expansion come down through the belly and the lower chest and the upper chest. As we start to intentionally deepen the inhale and exhale. At the top of your inhale, you might notice that there's a brief pause. And you might just even intentionally allow your exhale to happen a little more slowly, a little bit more fully than the previous exhale. And so just allowing your breath to be as deep and full as your breath would like to be in this moment. But having some intentionality there, purposefully allowing that breath to be full and big. Intentionally lengthening and slowing the exhale. And if you continue to breathe like that, I'll invite you to let your hands float to your heart center, right here in the front of your chest. In yoga, many people sort of make prayer hands and rest the thumbs on the sternum. I like to stack my hands one on top of the other, facing inward towards the heart. Some of my vets like to put a fist in one hand. Whatever gesture allows you to bring your attention to that place around your hands and heart, even as you continue to inhale and exhale. And if you bring your attention to this place that we call the heart center, lots of different things can be present here. We can notice all sorts of sensations and different emotions. But of all the things we might notice here as we breathe into our heart center, I'll invite you to see if you can allow the sensation of gratitude to arise. What would gratitude feel like if it were a physical sensation right here behind your hands in the center of your chest? Or maybe remembering a time when you felt gratitude, and what did that feel like right here in the center of your chest? And then continuing with these long, slow, deep inhales and exhales from this place of gratitude, right here in the center of your chest, or maybe it's just the idea of that place. I'll invite you to acknowledge to yourself just one thing in your life that you are grateful for today. I am so very grateful that you have all joined me here. I appreciate your attention and your engagement. Please reach out to me, Dan at Veterans Yoga Project, if I can be of service in any way.